Tell me a little bit about yourself.
I'm Derek Dawson. I've been a North Carolina State Highway Patrolman for 23 years. Prior to that, I was a United States Marine and served a little bit of time in the National Guard as well.
Okay, so tell me what your typical schedule looks like.
Well, I don't have a typical schedule. I'm on call all the time. I'm on call 24/7, but I try to work 40 hours a week, but that doesn't always work out. Our shifts are not always set. We work days, we work nights, we work weekends, we work holidays, but we try to keep it to 40 hours as much as possible.
Okay, so before becoming a law enforcement officer, what were the expectations you had about the impact your position would be on society?
Well, I don't want to say I was idealistic because when I went into the military, I had a very idealistic view of how my career was going to unfold. I learned a lot in that 5 years, and so by the time I became a law enforcement officer, I realized that um, the only way that I could have an impact is to touch people's lives in a positive way, and that's by making good judgment calls, treating them with respect, and that's what I wanted to do. Is I wanted to impact people in that manner.
So, what made you want to become a law enforcement officer, and what motivates you to do your job efficiently?
Well, I've always had a lot of self-discipline, so doing my job efficiently comes back to just taking pride in what I do. And I don't care what you do for a living, whether you're a law enforcement officer or what's your chosen field of endeavor. You should take pride in your work. And I became a law enforcement officer because I was inspired by my father, who was a retired Metropolitan Police officer in D.C. He always took great pride in his work, and I always found that it was very self-fulfilling. And he never wondered one day whether or not he made a difference, and that had a big impact on me.
So, let's say you were not a law enforcement officer. Given the opportunity, what profession would you choose?
Well, I really enjoyed the military, and I was aspiring to be a fighter pilot, but unfortunately, I have stigmatism, and my depth perception is not the best in the world, so my eyesight just kind of kept me out of that. But I got out of the military for the purpose of hopefully going back to college and going back in as an officer after completion of college. But I got to college in a life changing event. I met my wife and applied for the patrol, and I've been doing that ever since.
Okay, so in your opinion, as a law enforcement officer, what has been your greatest accomplishment?
Probably the lives that I've touched. My greatest accomplishment is certainly I try to tell my troopers that with every ticket you write, that could be a life that you save. The mere fact that you have interjected in that fashion may very well be the event that changes their behavior to save their life, or you may have even intervened at that point enough to save their life. And in 1998, myself and two bystanders rescued three adults and an infant child from a burning car on the interstate at a wreck I had went to investigate. And for that, we received the Governor's Award for heroism. So I really do think that what I've done over the years has saved lives.
Okay, so in your opinion, what has been your greatest failure as a law enforcement officer?
Well, unfortunately, that's not hard to define, but it is hard for me to talk about. But my greatest failure is the fact that I once hesitated in doing my job. In 2004, I was a sergeant in Iredell County, and I was in the office after a night of working the road, trying to catch up on some paperwork and some training that I had to put together. And a call came out about a drunk driver that was driving the opposite direction on I-40. And so I got up and I headed towards the door to go out and get on I-40 to intercept this drunk driver when I heard one of my troopers give out his location, and he was right. I mean, he couldn't have been in a better position to stop this car. And I stopped and I said, "Man, this is great. Finally, a police officer around when you need one." And I go back and I sit down, and then another call came out giving an updated location. and it was beyond where the trooper was. And I was trying to figure out what in the world happened. How did he miss that? But in reality, what had happened was is that we weren't getting real-time information. The cellular caller that called it in had called into Salisbury instead of Newton, and the two communication centers were communicating via text. So there was delay in the transmission. So I ran out the door, and unfortunately, I didn't get to the interstate in time before a crash had occurred. And when I got to the scene, there was a little girl that was killed as a result of that crash. And I remember the Statesville police officer that had got to the scene before I did was carrying her back to the ambulance, and he was covered in her blood. And I thought to myself, and I've regretted that ever since, because had I walked out the door at that moment, the first time that I got up, if I hadn't hesitated, I would have intercepted that car. And, when I tell people about this, and I've talked to many people through the years and shared this story, they always say, Derek, don't be hard on yourself. If you'd have walked out that door, it might have been you that got hit head on. And my response to that is always the same. I could live with that. I could have lived with that. But I have trouble living with knowing that I hesitated and that happened. If I could take all those awards that I got for saving those people on I-77, if I could give those awards back for one chance to go back and walk out that door, that's what I would do.
Okay, thank you. Now, do you think that your role has had an impact on society?
I do. I think that the lives that I've touched has impacted them. I pulled over a guy on 150 in Mooresville one time and arrested him for driving while impaired in a commercial motor vehicle. And he came to court and pled guilty and stuck around in the courtroom after the case was over. And when everybody had cleared the courtroom, he approached me, and I thought, here we go. He's going to be confrontational, because the night of the arrest, he pretty well badgered me about the fact that, hey, I'm going to lose my job, and I can't believe you're doing this to me. And he came up to me and he said, hey, I just wanted to tell you that I was pretty hard on you the night you arrested me. But when my wife came pick me up at the jail, she told me, she said, I'm rather relieved. She said, because I never liked the fact that you were a truck driver, and I didn't like you being gone all the time. And he said, since my arrest, my marriage has improved. I got a new job that I really like. We're building a house. And he said, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for the way I treated you, and thank you for saving my life. And that made a big difference to me.
Okay, so having been a law enforcement officer for some time, has this had an impact on you personally?
Absolutely. I don't think that there's any law enforcement officer that spends a career in law enforcement that hasn't been impacted by the things that he's done and that he's seen. Some positive, some negative, but it shapes who I am today for sure.
Okay, so do you think that society sees you differently?
I think that that law enforcement officers, not necessarily seen differently, but we definitely stand out. And people will perceive us in the manner in which they perceive law enforcement. And let me give you an example. I hate being in a restaurant and having somebody walk by with their young child and say, now, you better behave, because if you don't, that guy right there will put you in jail. I can't stand that. And I can't stand that because it makes me out to be the boogeyman. And I'm not. I'm not somebody that children should fear. I'm the guy you're supposed to run to for help. But on the flip side of that, I've had just as many people come up and say, hey, thank you for what you do for us. So I think it's a matter of perception.
Okay. And during your time as a law enforcement officer, has there ever been a situation in which you were feared for your own life or for your own safety while doing your job?
Yes, ma'am. I've been in 3 shootings. Well, first of all, every time you stop a car is a nerve-wracking situation. I mean, you just don't know who you're stopping. You don't know what that person's going to be like when you get up there, whether they're going to be irate or whether they're just going to be cooperative. You don't know if they just robbed a bank. You just don't know who you're pulling over. But no, those shooting situations have. I didn't know if I was going to walk away from those breathing. Uh,
Okay. So, by participating in this interview, what is your hope to contribute to humanizing law enforcement officers?
well, I would just like for people to see law enforcement as human beings and not robots. I like people to remember that I wear the uniform. It does not wear me.
And is there anything else that you would like to share personally or professionally that we did not cover in this interview?
The message that I would like to share with your students or with anybody watching this video is real simple. People's interactions with law enforcement are often initiated by their own actions. And therefore, I would say if you want to avoid law enforcement intervention in your life, make good judgment calls, obey the law, and don't give us a reason to interject. Unless you're going to walk up and say, "Hey, how you doing? Let me introduce myself." Remember that I'm a human being. I like people. This is why I do what I do. I don't put my life on the line every single day for total strangers because I can't stand people. Obviously, I like people, and I'm very personal. So take time to talk to me. Remember that I am a human being. If you don't like police officers, get to know one. You might change your mind. And by all means, if you would like to avoid us at all cost, just do what you're supposed to do and use good judgment.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your
Yes, ma'am.
time.